Welcome to Friendly Ties. We are headed over to the Czech Republic to do some silver mining today. This is Kutna Hora. All right, so we played a few games of Kutna Hora, which is a kind of, it's a market game, I guess you would describe it as. There's sort of these like income... The thing that is going to catch your eye are these little like income doodads. They just call them card stands, and like these cards sit in these little
income doodads. I like that. They're now called that.
Yeah, or the cardboard calculator or whatever, right? But they sort of like track the prices of these various resources in the game. And there are two maps. One where you are building the town kind of above, where we're all sort of like placing buildings, a mix of your like buildings that you own and also public buildings that no one owns, but you generally want to place near them. And then there's also the second map, the underground map, where all the silver mining is taking place, where you sort of have to go almost like an 8-bit game from like the 1980s, where you can like only go left and right and down.
Yeah, Dig Dug. Yeah.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah, that's what this game is going to look like to you if you're walking past.
You're like, wow, that looks like a Euro game. What's special about that?
Right, but also like silver shiny glaze upon all the pieces.
It is shiny.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is shiny.
And this is a funky game because so I got this one at Spiel. We've largely played it online, but I got a press copy there, and everyone kept talking to me about it, saying like, oh, this is such a player-driven game and it's highly interactive. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, it looks like a modern Euro, and most modern Euros are multiplayer solitaire, but you know, how interactive can it actually be? And it just kind of sat on my shelf for like 3 months. And then like 4 weeks ago, I was like, okay, I'm finally going to learn the game. And then I played it with you, Anastasia. We played it in real life. In the flesh.
In real life.
I know,
we
crazy.
touched it. We saw each other.
And the next day I played it again because I was just instantly captivated. And then like 4 days later I played it again. And then like I played it 4 times in like 8 days. And that is like most games in my collection, I do not play 4 times ever. So this is me saying what everybody else has been saying. Like, this is a really interactive game and I find it fascinating. But it is also... it's really hard to communicate why in a way that did not like put me to sleep anyway, because like people would I'd see videos and I'd hear podcasts and I'd be like, yeah, whatever. And now here I am making a podcast and I'm sure people are thinking, yeah, whatever. But man, this game to me definitely it punched in ways that I was not really familiar with.
You know, I have to give this game a little bit of credit for that actually, because when this game came out for Essen and I was reading all the reviews. John was in Essen this year, so I was kind of paying a little more attention than I might normally. And I was like, hey, you know, what is he going to bring back? What's going to be interesting? Like, what are we going to play? And I watched, I don't know what it was. I was just like, I watched something, I read something, and I was like, no.
It just looks like another Euro,
like,
right?
It wasn't just that. It was just, honestly, the systems as they were being explained to me just seemed overly convoluted, complicated something. I don't know quite what it was, but my brain was just like, that's going to be, I don't know. I didn't see anything about it that I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. And then the way, if we just sat here and listed all the different systems in this game,
it would probably put everyone to sleep, right?
Yeah, it would just seem like a lot, right? They would just be like, it's this and then this and then this, and then it would be like, okay, but hey, I'll play any good game. So, we actually, didn't know much about it. John just kind of opens it up. And really, like Nick was saying, the thing that kind of stood out to me, John called them cardboard computers in that moment. But I was like, all right, what is this? And, I got to give the game some credit. It really, I'm not gonna bury the lead on this. This isn't a game that's super for me. And we're going to talk about that, I'm sure, a lot as we go. Yeah. But it really comes together. It's a much simpler game, the way these pieces fit together, than I expect it to be. It is a very just little, I don't know, little what did you say? Market simulation experience.
It's an economy, right?
100%.
Yeah, it is interesting because there's 6 resources in the game.
Yeah.
And some of the resources are very interactive and then some are not all that interactive. So the most interactive resource is wood, which, you've played games before. You know that wood's an important resource.
Yeah.
This is set in like 1342 frog or something like that.
They need a lot of wood.
So wood's even more important, right? And if folks build wood buildings, then everybody gets to build stuff for cheaper, and if they don't, then it's more expensive. And that's definitely the kind of like tightest lever in the game. And then I would say that the second most interactive kind of market is the coal and silver market, because the more the coal and silver work inversely with each other.
I'm actually going to interrupt you real quick. We keep calling it coal, but it's actually raw silver, like thematically.
What?
Yeah,
What?
yeah. Like the idea is that you can dig out the raw silver from the ground, which is what we've been calling coal because we play so many board games. And then silver
looks like coal.
smelters on the surface, like you build silver buildings, make silver. They're using that. And that's why there's a kind of a correlation between how those two things work in the economy. The more ore there is, the more ore there is to turn into silver, essentially.
I don't want to admit this to all of you right now, but like you've played so many Euros with silver smelting and coal, and like it's all coming together.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it's like a whole moment. 'Cause you basically just told me that you grow wheat and turn it into bread.
And so I guess then I would say that the second most interactive resources are what I used to call coal, and John just informed me are actually silver ore.
Yeah.
So silver ore or silver ingots or raw silver or coal, whatever you want to call it, black lumps that
Yes.
are pulled from the earth, interact really well with refined silver. There we go.
Yeah.
Processed silver.
Yeah.
Because those two things are like inverse of each other, right? If there is more demand or there's more kind of like silver production, then that raw silver is worth more money. So there's that kind of
there's
strong
more
push
smelters who are like, give me I need ore. I can't make forks without these
Right.
black lumps.
Right, exactly. Then I would say sort of in third or fourth place, I guess since we're talking about silver and the raw silver as two different resources. So in fourth place comes the permits, which, cares about how much mining has occurred throughout the course of the game. And then in fifth and sixth place are meat and beer, which essentially are just kind of build these, the town gets larger, and they don't interact much with the other systems except for as more folks move to the town, as the town gets developed, the price of these things is going to go down over the course of the game.
Yeah, I think it's kind of an abstracted cost. Like you never spend beer and you never spend food, but the price for them goes up as the population goes up. So the spending is just kind of like thematically hand waved away, and it's income. It's making money.
Okay, but what neither of these guys are doing right now is, yes, all of these things are true, but the important thing to remember here is that you don't ever get any of these resources. Like you don't take them, you
That's
don't
true.
collect them, you don't have them.
There are
You
no
don't get
black
to-
lump tokens.
You don't get to stack them. No, which would be cool actually. But you don't, you're not getting your little beer cube situation going on. You are ostensibly building buildings that are giving you a certain amount of, honestly, it's shares, but sure, you can say, beer production or whatever. And then the cost of those goods is going to go, well, frankly, it's going to go down when you build it because you've increased the volume. And then as the population increases, it will go up and then you'll make more money and blah, 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 blah. But the only resources you actually take in this game is money.
Yeah.
That's it. These little cardboard computer what's it thingies, they are controlling the market, and that market is like a two-dimensional. Like it goes up. Someone explain
up,
how the market
up because there's more there's more cards for the up,
cards.
right? Up means we
There's
put more cards in.
Go up. They have so it's a deck of cards, and you pull those out as like the population goes up, and then the prices go up, and then there's little sliders, and they push the things down. So as prices down. So as you build things, you push the sliders over, and then you pull honestly, it's a really cool representation of the market.
Yeah.
I've never seen it before. I've seen it, there's other games, Clans of Caledonia is a good example where there's a different type of, a market that's player driven that goes up and down, but I've never seen this 2D market.
Mm-hmm. I mean, realistically, it's a grid, right? Like there's essentially functionally 6 gigantic graphs. And instead of putting 6 graphs the size of like a standard sheet of paper, they're able to compact those down into these 2 little things. So like from like a mechanical function perspective, it is quite elegant, but from a like what it's actually doing, you're just like either going in the x-axis or the y-axis, and you never go down. Like you only go up in the x and you only go up in the y, but one goes up and one goes down. It allows these things to fluctuate in really fascinating ways. I could do something that causes more people to come to the town, and that means thematically more people using the same amount of wood. That wood's going to get more expensive. Mechanically, what that means is in the game we literally just played, on my very first turn I sent a miner down, and they found some good silver ore, I guess, and people talked. So somebody came to town, increasing the population, and that increased the price of wood from 2 each to 3 each, which is a massive increase, right?
And then John ruined the game. That's what happened.
and that's why I won the
In
game,
the first
because
turn.
that's what I did on the very, very first turn. But like that is a huge impact when only certain people have control of this, and that's a really fascinating element to this game. Like we just played the game, and you too could control the wood market. You got to control how low the price was, and I could not. But what I could do is drive up the price, because I was all about beer and food. And so I spent this entire last game that we just played just trying to bring people to the town. I was, the shop selling shovels to all the 49ers who are going, trying to find
And the reason
gold.
he wanted to do that was because, so there are 2 key things to know about this game. One, you don't produce all of the resources. There are, as Nick beautifully said, there are 6 resources in the game. And depending on the player count and just the setup cards, like you will produce 3 of them. And there will be some overlap in some cases. In some cases, there won't be. It's crazy town.
Yeah. I mean, one weird thing to think about, when I first heard about this game and I first learned the rules, so you could be paired up with up to 1 other person. Like I said, like Nick and I both could do taverns, make beer in this last time. I guess it's hospitality. And I thought it was like,
hospitality, meat and beer, hospitality.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be like, so like, Nick and I are going to be working together in this one thing. And then, Anastasia and Nick, they're both trying to do the wood thing. But actually, no, it's a series of 1v1s. It's like, Nick and I are competitors trying to deliver beer to the town. And so then Nick makes, the silver ore, and I don't really care, but I really care if he makes beer, because he's undercutting me, essentially. We're just undercutting people back and forth, depending on the player count.
So I don't think it's as crazy as everybody undercutting everybody. Because
come in with some math, Nick.
Because even at the maximum player count, the most players that you'll have your guild interact with is 1.
Yes.
It's just the question of how many of your guilds are overlapping with the other players. In a 2-player game, there's literally no overlap.
Right.
In a 3-player game, you're 2/3 overlapped, and in a 4-player game, you're fully overlapped with the other players. And so this makes it like different from something like Brass, where the players kind of like elect what lanes they go into at the beginning. Yeah. In this one, your lanes are predetermined for you at the beginning. And then the question is more, what are you going to lean into? Are you just going to essentially let the other player in your market be the one that sort of controls those buildings? And, when you hear control, like in most games, you're like, control, that gives them power over other players. But that's not actually really true in this game. It's an evaluation prospect of, am I interested in building this building because of the bonuses that it gives me, be it either income or the actual reward I get for putting the building into play. And the game has 2 different methods of incentives, like a lot of Euros. One is go wide, and then the other one is go deep. So you kind of are choosing which of those 2 things you would prefer to do, I think, in most games.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to take this as an opportunity here. So in a 2 and 3 player game, you're going to play over 6 rounds. In a 4-player game, you're going to play over 5 rounds. And all you're going to do on your turn is you're going to basically use a small, I want to say deck. It's like a hand of cards. It's an action selection mechanism. It's not unlike Concordia, except you're never going to go to the Senate. You're never going to add any cards. You've got your cards. And then each of the cards has a top and a bottom. If you listen to our podcast about Nucleum, it's very similar, except, you're not only going to do one thing on the card, right? So you get to choose. And so your actions are somewhat limited in as much as like you have a choice of if you're going to play this, you're giving up something else, but there are 2 of every action available to you except for 1, and then there's a joker. So you then get to take 5 actions each round. And this is kind of cool because you're going to take 2 actions for your first 2 turns, and then on your last one, you're going to take 1. But ultimately, it's not a lot of actions. And like any kind of complex Euro, you know, the actions are pretty simple, but, you know, it's like, you know, buy buildings, decide where you're going to build those buildings, then build the buildings, then mine, then income, then do this other Santa Barbara thing, which we'll talk about later. So like that's it. And, you know, then you have that as an underlayment to essentially this crazy or not crazy market simulation.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of Euro route is probably what engaged me most with the game is that puzzle, because you know, John loves the shared incentives. Nick is just smart, and
he's doing math over there.
He's doing math, and and I was like, okay, cool. Like this is a Euro game. Play actions, do stuff. But man, it is hard to play it like that when things are so constantly changing in this game. You're constantly having to adapt, and if you like a game like that, you're gonna love this.
I mean, it's like I said, it's an economy, and every action has a reaction of some sort, and sometimes it's a small reaction, and sometimes you make wood now cost $4 each instead of $3 each, and suddenly everybody yells at you from across the table. But you know, it's one of those games where you cannot go into it saying, this time I'm gonna focus on building up top, or this time I'm gonna really work on mines because I've never really done the mines before. I think it's one of those games where you have to be like, this moment seems to be telling me that I should do this or do that. You know, these subtle different things, like some from setup a little bit, but also a lot from the player dynamics between us. Like I've played 5 times now, and in 2 of those games, I had the wood guild. So I had the option of constructing wooden buildings, which, as we said before, when you construct these buildings, the price of wood goes down. Everybody cheers. Hooray. I've never built a wood building. And I didn't do that because I went into those games thinking, I'm this evil wood tyrant, and I'm never going to build the wood, and that'll make everything expensive, and everybody will suffer. No, I just did it because as I played the game, I kept thinking about it like, oh, is now the time to build a wood? No, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. Like every single turn, I was kind of readjusting what I was doing. Like you will frequently have a plan and then realize you have to throw your plan out the window because of something that somebody else did. It's a weird game, right? Like to talk about. I remember when I first learned it, I was honestly almost a little intimidated to teach it, just to see how all these come together, because this is far from the most complicated game I've ever played. Like easily, like Nucleum and Evacuation, the last 2 episodes we did, both of those games mechanically are much more complicated than this game is. But the way the opaqueness of the interaction, certainly on the first play, definitely it left me wary, and then it made me kind of excited after I actually got to play it that first time.
It's interesting you say that about the rules, because I feel like the teach because I learned it from you, and I was the last person to learn this game, and I thought the teach was very clean, and it all makes sense, right? Like very intuitive action selection system. You know, to me, I think the primary incentive for them putting that in the game is to sort of say, hey, you're going to take 2 of these actions, and you need to think a little bit ahead about what you want to sacrifice in the way of doing that. But it all is very intuitive in that sense. The stuff that I agree is pretty opaque, even still, honestly, after a couple plays, is like how you're getting your points in this game. And I think part of the reason that eludes me, and I'm very bad at this game.
You haven't won. You played 3 times and you haven't won, and that is
not only have
unusual.
I not won, I've been crushed. So like summarily in each of the games. Like it's bad, y'all. So I'm not good at it. So take my opinion here with a grain of salt. But the scoring, you know, you're getting little edges over your opponents in this game. This is not a game where you're like, I'm going to construct my strategy and then employ my strategy. You were trying to like get a couple extra points here, couple extra points there, and essentially use that to come out ahead. I suspect that when people are really good at this game, your like top to bottom scores are going to be within like 5 points every time. That's kind of what it feels like, but right now I'm losing by 15 points.
Yeah, I mean, every point is important in this game. Like the first game Anastasia and I played, I think she beat me on the tie, and we both had, I think, like 58 points. That 4-player game we all played, and Anastasia was in second place, 1 point ahead of me, and then our friend Shadow was in first place, 1 point ahead of her. So between 3 points, there was the three of us, and all three of us did vastly different things in this game. Like I went huge on the income, and Shadow barely did any income, and Anastasia spent the entire game underground, and then our points were almost identical, right? Like if I had 2 more points, I would have tied for the win, and yet I was in third place. And Nick, if I remember correctly, was only like 4 points behind that as well. And so, like, this game does feel a little overtuned in some ways. That sometimes when I see that, I'm like, oh, cool, like lots of different things that you can do can get you there. But also, it raises the eyebrow of like, or maybe everything is about the same value. I don't know.
I think so. I want to comment on that because I think something that just kind of listening and thinking a little bit more about our previous plays, something that just came to me is like part of the magic of this game is that every play of it is going to be a little bit different or a lot of bit different. And the big reason for that is because of the markets. Like I played this game, Nick and I played a 2-player game yesterday, and I played tonight's game basically the same. Like I was like, I'm going to do the same things I did yesterday and with some augmentation because my resources that I was making or whatever were different. But the big difference between today's game and yesterday's game is the price of wood. So here I am, doing, pretending like I can do this whole building strategy and I'm
so
gonna, like,
wood was
do all this
cheaper
stuff.
in your 2-player game?
Yeah, wood was like $1 and it was awesome, or a 1 groschen or whatever.
Yes.
And
Instead
and
of 4
here,
or 5.
I'd never seen it at 4 groschen. And so here I am being like, oh, I'm trapped, and you have to adapt.
Yeah.
You have to adapt. But it's hard to adapt because it is like, just as I explained, the way the actions are, it's a sequence. And if you kind of do things out of sequence, and it's really, really hard for me to waste actions, and you have to like waste them sometimes. And oh God, it feels so bad. I mean, there was a point in the middle of this game where I was like melting down. I had kind of a long day, but I was like, I just could not compute. Could not make a choice that it would.
On numerous occasions in our last play, you said you hated this game while laughing.
Oh, I did. I was sort of saying that, but it was also like I hated them. Like I hated you.
Yes,
I just hated everything.
Yeah,
but that's all to kind of say like that's kind of my point here, which is like this is a game that is going to create an experience, and that market, that ever-changing market, irrespective of whether whether it's player driven or driven in part by that chart or however it's going to kind of play out, it's going to create a different experience. And I think your ability to adapt to that and change to that is kind of key. So I actually don't think the game is overtuned. I think it needs to be that tuned, and then it's up to the players to decide how are they going to make that happen for them.
Yeah, if the game wasn't overtuned, I think it would completely collapse. Like it feels like it needs that. And I think part of the reason there's that sort of like slow burning meltdown feeling when you're taking your actions is every action in this game is like very, very light, as Anastasia was talking about before. You take 25 actions in a 4-player game, 30 in a 3 or 2-player game. Mm-hmm. And, in order to put one building into play, you have to take a rights action to take the building, then a plot action to claim a spot on the board, and then finally you can build the building. And that's assuming that you have the money to do
right.
so.
You might have to income first.
And you might have to income along the way, right? So I just described 4 of the 6 actions in the game that are available to you. And so everything is very slow burning. But because of that, it means that when you're picking up money or when you're deciding how much money you're going to spend, you are realizing that it's going to be a fifth of the game before you get more cash. And it can be sooner if you choose to do that.
Right.
But if you don't do it sooner, you might miss out on some scoring opportunities or some dollars. And, while that's just gaming, that's the nature of things. In this game, because points are so precious, missing out on those 2 points that, you might get for going now and then, like you really are sitting there being like, I can't mess this up.
Right.
Yeah. And yet you can, right? There is a feeling in all of my 4 plays, which is not that many, frankly, because I do think this is a game. Man, I think if this is a game that intrigues you, I think this is a game. Like our friend Shadows played it like 8, 9, probably more. That was when I last checked.
Yeah.
I think he just did a bunch of those in like a week. Like this is a game that if your game group's into it, like you're gonna want to kind of explore it and go, and like it's gonna create really cool experiences for you. But in my somewhat limited experience, I'd gotten myself into this arc where I was like, okay, at the beginning of the game, everything's going to seem open and possible. And then like round 2, I just got to make it through rounds 2 and 3. It's going to be really bad. It's going to be really hard. I'm going to have no money. Everything's going to feel horrible. It's going to be horrible. And then unfortunately in this last game, everything stayed horrible and it was just bad. But in the previous games, it all got better. And then suddenly I had lots of money. And the truth is, like, tonight I made bad choices.
Yeah.
I wasn't maybe being as smart about the actions that I was taking. The game even tells you, like, don't do some of the things that I decided to do, because you need to invest in things that are going to make you money and then go try to get points. And, I just tried to go get points and I didn't get very many of them.
You did not get the most. Yeah, I mean, I guess the overtuned thing is it doesn't really make sense in a game like this where the players are so integral into the balance of everything and the value of everything. Like this game that we just played, this 3-player game, Nick was the only one who could construct the ore buildings, the silver ore buildings, and Anastasia and I could both construct the silver smithing buildings, but Nick could not. And we had this, there are these self-perpetuating cycles that are sometimes positive and sometimes negative, where in this play, neither Anastasia or I built silver early. I was going on, meat and beer, and Anastasia was more focusing on permits and whatnot. And Nick was sitting there like, my ore isn't worth much because nobody is making silver smelters, and so there's just pile of black lumps on the ground up in the city, and nobody cares about that. They care about shiny silver forks and whatnot. And me and Anastasia, who could create those silver buildings, were like, well, there isn't that much silver ore around because Nick didn't feel incentivized to mine it because we weren't making the infrastructure. So it was a catch-22 of like a negative spiral there. But the flip side that I've seen many times, and I think again it's just every game is different in this way, is oftentimes, is certainly with more players, with 4 players instead of 3, somebody does build a silver smelter in the first round or so, and then suddenly that makes ore more valuable. By definition, automatically it just makes it more valuable always. And then the moment that happens, the people who can make essentially get income from the ore, which is kind of everybody, but specifically some people get to do it more. They're like, okay, cool, let's get some more of this stuff because it's worth more, right? And by getting more of this stuff to make it worth more, that makes the silver worth more, which makes more people want to jump in and build silver. And then it's interesting. There's almost like an updraft thing, like a thermal. You see soaring birds, and it's like sometimes you see a bird working real hard and then they land. And other birds just catch a thermal and they just cruise up and up and up. And I feel like there's like this, shaking hands kind of cooperative nature that can happen in this game that propels certain economies up and certain economies down into the ground in each play. And, every player's subtle decisions seem to influence which direction it might end up going. I don't know. Maybe sometimes you can reverse that in the middle of the game. We don't have that many data points, but, the incentives are player made.
No, I want to talk about this definitely a little bit more because this is where I'm going to level my biggest criticism about this game. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm terrible at this game. I've only gotten crushed. Take what I say with a grain of salt. But I want to tell a little story. A couple decades ago, there was this game release called Princes of Florence, which I think is a really cool game. I think they just re-released it last year.
They did, yeah.
But turns out my brother and I learned over time that we actually really hated this game because in a 7-round game, you could tell on turn 4 that you were going to lose for sure. And then you just had to sit there and play the rest of the game. And this game has some of that in my experience. In the 2-player game I played with Anastasia, less than halfway through the game, I was like, oh, I'm behind. Maybe I can try this to catch up. And it didn't work. In this game that we just played tonight, Anastasia and John both opened by taking the buildings of the guilds that I was in with them and then not building the Silver Guild. So when I went ore, I just felt like I was behind from the beginning of the game for the whole game long. And I really felt somewhat powerless to do a lot about that. And again, I'm bad at the game. Maybe I just don't know how to dig my way out of these silver tunnels, right?
Yeah.
So again, take it with a grain of salt. But my experience with the game has been I can see the writing on the wall, and then I am just scrabbling for life for the rest of the game. I think what I'm trying to boil down my comment to there is that this game doesn't have any kind of catch up anythings.
No.
And I think that's because the game is about getting those little edges. So once you start kind of sliding on those edges, it seems to be a kind of, it's not a downward slide. Like it's not a death spiral, nothing like that. It just is, it can feel like a slow march to the end of the game.
Okay, so I'm with you actually. Okay, I don't want to completely disagree, except I'm gonna disagree just a little bit because just as a counterpoint, in our we all played one 4-player game of this with our friend Shadow, and like I said, Shadow has played this game a lot, enough to be giving us kind of like some pointers as we're playing the game. And you ever played for the audience, you ever played a game like this where like you make some mistakes early on and then you feel like you're kind of embarrassed, like you're just like, oh my god, like this is bad, like everyone kind of feels bad for you at the table,
right?
Like they just kind of know you've tanked yourself.
Well,
this is what happened.
Poor Anastasia's turn. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit like that. Okay, like a little bit. That like they're not being patronizing. It kind of was, and everyone was feeling a little sorry for me, and I was feeling really sorry for me. But I was like, all right, we're in this. Like, let's go. And our friend Shadow was like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. I had no money.
And then you came in second, 1 point behind him.
And then I came in second by 1 point, and I honestly don't know how I did it, but I that's the only reason I'm going to counterpoint you ever so slightly, Nick, is because I've watched you play these last 2 games, and I would agree with you. And I even in our tonight's game, I was like, I think this is not going great for me. But I will say in that game, and maybe that was a byproduct of 4 players, and then I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about player counts, but I was able somehow to like carve my way back up. I just like, I was like, point here. Like I came back, and nobody thought I was going to. And I think when I came in second, everyone was like, what? Like that how'd that happen? And so that kind of fed into what I was trying to say about like early in the game, there is still hope, but you really have to, be willing to you really have to change the way that you're playing. And a lot of the ways that you change the way that you're playing are not intuitive to me. And I think part of that is like, I had to do some things that felt good for other people because of the way that this game requires you to do that. And I don't normally play like that. I mean, I play a lot of games against Nick, and mostly I'm just trying to like knife him in the back and take every point I can get,
Yeah, so I don't have a specific data point for this, but I can't help but fear/wonder if it is possible to lose this game because of what other people did. Not like targeting you.
And maybe that's totally to Nick's point. Yeah.
Yeah, but like if other people play poorly in particular, like if people are playing at a high level and you lose because of that interaction, then that is something, and that's a separate discussion. But like, you could definitely play this game for the first time with a table full of people who don't know what's going on, and people will accidentally making very bad decisions and then not realizing why until later, and then that kind of gifts other people a bunch of points. Like in my other 4-player game, the scores were between 40 and 45 for 3 of us, and then the winner had 73 points. It was like he had almost twice the points the rest of us had. And at the end of the game, it was like, what happened? And we looked through, and it's like, oh, it's a perfect storm. Like, I did this, which just gifted them points, and then you did that, and that just gifted them points. And so when it's kind of opaque like this, I think it's possible to bumble around and hurt other people accidentally. But I don't know, maybe, again, data set's tiny, but maybe there are situations where even when everybody's playing really competitively, like this game right here, like maybe if it was, 3 Nicks playing against Nick, maybe the Nick who was in Nick's actual position was in a bad spot anyway.
You
Like,
can't
I don't know.
you can't use me as an example for 3 good players playing against each other when I've spent this whole episode talking about how I can't play this game.
No, it's a leopard can't
doesn't
change
work.
its stripes, right? I just said a leopard has stripes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's the thing is like, are any of us good at this game? By strictly speaking, by the numbers, I am the best one at this game.
That is true.
John has only won it once.
I have
tonight.
barely won. I've finally won tonight.
Like, this is not.
But not barely.
I don't know.
No, not yeah. No.
2 things I want to say about what you said, John. One is I think your point about this game allowing people to accidentally interact negatively and make you lose, to me, is actually probably a positive. Like if it's a game and you're claiming that the game has good interaction between the players, then that has to allow for situations in where players might accidentally hose you or on purpose, right? If a game is going to allow for players to have that kind of interaction, like that has to exist in a game. So to me, that's actually a positive. Even though, I think sometimes people tend to focus on the negative of like, I got hosed by the guy who didn't know what he was doing. But like, frankly, that's a necessary evil if the game is going to allow you to care about each other.
Yeah.
Second thing I want to say about that interaction component is that I suspect, I've now played this at each player count only once for each of them, but I suspect that this game is perhaps best at 4 players only. 2 players is the follow-up, and I think 3 players is by far the worst.
Interesting.
Fascinating.
Expound. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'd love to hear your.
I
what you think about
completely agree.
Yeah.
The 4-player guild layout means that there's just a touch point of interaction with every other player, so everyone is responsible for interacting with each other somewhere.
Yeah.
In the 2-player game, there's no overlap. You're just playing against each other in these economies. And then in the 3-player game, it's a partial overlap. And because of the partial overlap, like the game that I'm salty because of the game we played. I'm not actually salty, but like I'm burned because of the game we played tonight, right? Like in that the way that the interaction of this game worked out, it was like negative interaction. Okay, I'm toast. Like
Yeah.
And that can happen in a 4-player game. I think it's a lot less likely, and it seems like it's just more likely in a 3-player game. So I appreciate that the 4-player game has, I think, higher interconnectivity in a way that doesn't feel as, I don't know, potentially devastating as it does in a 3-player game.
One thing that I think has come up a lot with this game is like this idea like you can't play this game at 2. But in our 2-player game of this, Nick and I were both really surprised at how much the game still captured the economy and how it played out. And the other thing, there are these event cards and they're very simple. They don't change the game super dramatically, but they do just kind of like mess with things enough. Like our first event was like the taxes went crazy high, like immediately, which is not something that maybe normally would happen in a 3 or 4-player game. And so that was a totally kind of different experience playing in the game, and the ability to have a little bit more of that sense of control because you're only dealing with one other person and you sort of have to, there's no overlap in the markets. And so it's just a different experience.
It's fun but different.
But it's fun but different, and it was an enjoyable one. I will say though that we both, and I don't want to speak for you, Nick, but I think we both kind of walked away from the 2-player experience feeling a little bit more like the cardboard computer was dictating the game more than maybe we were dictating the game. You're not going to get everything that we've been talking about, this crazy, like, oh my God, John ruined the price of wood and all that. You are getting that a little bit, but you're not going to get it as much in a 2-player game. But I still think it was a really solid 2-player experience, far more solid than I expected it to be.
Yeah, I thought the 2-player game was going to collapse, but actually it was definitely pleasant. And I just want to like echo that sentiment of it is a player-driven economy, but it's not like container. It's not like it's not Sidereal Confluence. It's not a purely player-driven economy. Like it's that you're playing the game and the game tells you, hey man, no one has gone into this market, so like go into this market. And it's going to give you the incentives, and so you're going to respond to those incentives.
Yeah. I think I have not played 2-player with you, but I played 2-player with a friend of mine, Matt. and he stomped me, but but I still had a really fun time with it. I was also surprised, and I think one of the reasons it works is because of a more subtle element of shared incentives in the game that I didn't really notice until I played the 2-player, and that has to do with those cardboard computers that we keep talking about, and that specifically there's 2 of them, and they split the 3 different resources up. On one of them there is wood, food, and beer, and on the other one there is the raw silver, refined silver, and permits. And when people quote unquote come into town, the population increases. That affects the price of wood, of beer, and of food, and it makes all of them go up. And so you're sharing there. Like, that's actually where the sharing is. Like I said before, at first I thought the other person who shared a guild with me was going to be my partner, but they're actually my enemy. Your partner is the person that you don't clash with a guild, but you work together with on that little cardboard computer. For example, if I have the meat guild and Nick has the beer guild, then by me having population come to the town to make my meat guild better, I'm making Nick's beer guild better. And in the 2-player game, you're doing that as well. You're sharing in some ways. You don't share with any guilds, but you share with these 2 different sort of separate economies with, how much silver is there, how many people are there.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it works at, kind of all player counts, but I think that's why it in particular works at 2, because you're still shaking hands with one hand and like punching with the other.
I think there's something important here too that I want to kind of like point out, which is like, this game, money isn't worth anything at the end of this game. So you're playing this like economic simulation where you are making, like in our first game of this, at the end of the game, I had 120 Gretchens.
I think you had like 180 because you had to do an extra income for reasons we don't need to go into. But yeah, it was astonishing.
Had so much money,
and you won that game on the tiebreaker because money is just a tiebreaker, and we were tied.
And I had
like 5 and you had 160.
Just rolling in the money. But the thing is that but that's actually like not good, really. Like if you have all that money, you really should have spent it on something, right? And so there is kind of I want to say like an arc or a flow of the game, or just you need to get points, but you also need to get money. So you really need to generate an economy so that you have enough money to do everything that you want. But then at a certain point, if you're playing well, which tonight I wasn't, you're generating so much money that like you don't want to waste actions on that anymore. You're like, I have plenty of money. I don't even need to think about money, right? And so like in a game like tonight where wood was so expensive, I really needed to focus on something else, make just tons of money.
Wood was so expensive, you being one of the 2 people who could make it cheaper.
Oh, whatever, John. Whatever.
No, that was interesting. Like, because you kept being like, Nick, why aren't you making the wood cheaper? And Nick kept being like, well, Anastasia, why aren't you making the wood cheaper? And I was on the side being like, all I do is make wood more expensive, and so I'm just going to smash income so I can afford this expensive wood. I think that's why I ultimately won, because I was just on the side like, I have no fight in this. I'm just gonna get more money to pay for this expensive wood.
So Nick and I both controlled wood, and I kept looking to Nick to make the wood cheaper, because if I make it cheaper, then both John and Nick are going to take a bunch of actions before I get to use it. And part of it might be more expensive again. Is by the time it gets back around to me, it's more expensive. So I go to all that work, I make wood cheap, then they blow up the population, and then it goes up, and so that's part of the kind of struggle with the game for me, is that like you do things that are good for you, and then they're good for everyone. And like Nick always mocks me because I'd be like, there's this public building element that we haven't really touched on, but like you build those public buildings and you put so much work into them, but it's not yours. And so Nick's favorite thing to do, and remind me in the stupid game, is he's like, it's a public building.
Yeah.
It's literally in the name.
Like, get away from my building. And we're like,
and I'm just saying, hypothetically, if a person were in this situation, they could, in theory, stop building public buildings and actually build economies to help the other people in their economies out. In theory.
What? But why?
Well, I think that's
help me.
I think that's partly why.
It does.
I think that's partly why the on your turn,
terrible
the
economy.
First 2 turns of the round, you could do double actions. The double action lends a lot of strategic options versus just doing a single action. And so, like in this game that we just played, in the very last round, Nick finally, for the only time in the game, constructed a wood building with his first action. It plummeted
Finally.
the price of wood from 5 each to 3 each. Nick immediately built a huge building with this new, much cheaper ratio, and a bunch of population came up, and at the end of Nick's turn, the price of wood was 4. So at the start of his turn, it was 5. At the end, it was 4. Yay! But right there in the middle, Nick got to capitalize on a 3 conversion rate for a brief moment. And I think that's where the strength, to a certain extent, of the Wood Guild is. I think controlling the Wood Guild is probably one of the more nuanced and strategically hard things to do in this game. I think it's very easy to be like, why would I make wood cheaper? That helps everybody. I'm just not going to do it. That's certainly what I've done when I've played wood.
I mean, yes. I think that little exchange encapsulates so much of this game, and that is what, the table feels like. It's like you just have to adapt to that market. But, I do want to take a second, since you brought it up, John, to kind of like to talk about that concept of when is the price of something going to go up, right? And when is it going to go down? So, whenever you construct a building, the price is always going to go down, at least for the next action, right?
Yeah.
But as population comes, or as you dig in the mine, the prices are going to go up. And the way that they go up, unless you've played the game a lot, or you have
You have a cheat
gone
sheet?
online and found a cheat sheet
Yeah.
to kind of see, or you're going through the cards and looking ahead, you don't know when they're going to go. The first game of this we played, I was like tense the whole time because I was like, oh my God, like what if the price goes up? Like how long until it goes up? Because I don't know, right? And I mean, that's kind of a cool experience to have. It's like watching a horror movie. Like I hate doing. So it's a good comparison. But as you play it more and you want to play it more strategically, it does sort of urge you, or I feel like, at least the way we play games, like you kind of want to know what's coming. And I think there's even a post on BGG where the designer's like, here is a cheat sheet, but like also this is not what I intended. Like they did it. They don't want you to know. They want there to be that kind of opaqueness in the market. But honestly, it both stresses me out so much not to know, and then also like makes me AP gazillion to know. So I don't know. But
I'm so with you. Just like I understand the idea and even the appeal of a market feeling organic, right? I think that's the goal of being like, yeah, you don't know, the prices are going to go down a little bit. Like, what the general pressure of those prices are. As population goes up, the prices are going to go up. If you're going to build a thing, it's going to bring the prices down. Like, great. I know those flows are going to happen. And I appreciate that the designer wants you to have an organic experience. But this is not an organic game. It's a counting game. It's a bean counting game. Yeah. And if you want me to play a bean counting game with an Excel sheet in it and you don't want me to look at the Excel sheet, there's something very weird about that to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, I think that I think this game just, there's a tension to that you just have to kind of like embrace, right? And then you have to decide like, how are you going to play it? But I think it's important to note that this is a game that, for us, triggered a lot of AP amongst all three of us, which is actually kind of a rare thing.
Yeah, Nick AP'd more in this game than just about any game I can remember for a while. Yes.
Yeah, and I think that is something by the nature of feeling like you can have a certain sense of control of what's happening, and also like you can't. And I think that it's all kind of available to you there, but it's also not.
I actually want to kind of dispute calling it AP because it's not about the actions, it's about the math. Almost every time that I was like taking a really long turn, it's because I was doing math for 4 actions ahead.
That's true. You weren't paralyzed. You were just analyzing.
Right. I wasn't like, what am I stuck in between? I was like, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Can I do that?
Yes.
Let's make sure, because otherwise the action I take right now like hoses me.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. There's other stuff going on in this game that we haven't touched on. There's patricians that you can pay your personal money for to squeeze points, and I think they can be a huge part of winning. There's this St. Barbara Cathedral that you build because this game is set in the Middle Ages, so of course you have to build
you
got to build a church. It's just those are the rules.
Gotta build a church.
Those are the rules.
Gotta do it.
There's other elements, reputation that we haven't talked about. This game I have a lot of strong feelings for, and personally, I've really enjoyed, and I want to keep playing. But also, like, how do I convey what makes this game exciting to me?
I think this is one of those games that you have to explore. And I think it's so important, for at least for me, to say something that John hit on, which is like, I spent the whole game that we just played talking about how much I hated the game, the play, John, Nick,
the moment,
everything, my life, and laughing. Like, I was just like so angry because of what this game like elicits out of me. And I think this is just not like, look, Brass is a good game. It does the same thing. Like, I hate these games. We have to work together, then you mess up my plans.
Like semi-cooperative in all the best ways. I mean, it's in a lot of ways a shared incentive game. It doesn't really have stocks, but this is my jam right now. Like,
all those little edges, I want them to be big edges. I want to like do something and then just get massive. Like, at the end of I like with this whole plan, and then I was like, John's gonna get just as many points as I am from this. This sucks. It's all that
Thank
work.
you.
And then it's just like, oh my God. But having said that, I do think that there's an experience to be had here. And every time I play it, I know it's going to be a unique experience, and I know it's going to be interesting. And we have played many games like I actually truly did not like. And if we truly did not like it, you're probably not going to hear about it, actually,
right?
Because we don't really play like that. So we wouldn't be sitting here if we didn't, enjoy our time with this game and want to share it and think that it's, worth your time to go explore it. And I think that this is, I don't play a game 4 times that I don't like. I mean, I just don't like, so this is, so I think it creates for an interesting experience there.
One element for me, which has me excited about this game and excited to show other people, as the game teacher, is kind of what Nick said before. Like, yeah, the first time I read the rules, I was intimidated to teach it. But once I played it once, I was like, oh, I see how it all clicks. And now, as a rules teacher, I have no problem teaching this game. I've timed myself. I can teach this game in about 20 minutes. And the mental weight, like the punchiness of the decisions and everything when I'm playing, it comes in like games that take me an hour to teach. And so I think that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about this game, and why I've had like game days and whatnot where people mention it. I'm like, oh, you want to play right now? Like, I'll teach it. Let's go. Whereas, even like the very last game we played, Evacuation, I really like Evacuation. I've had a lot of fun. But the last game day that we had, someone came over and they're like, I'd really like to play Evacuation today. And I was like, I don't really feel like teaching Evacuation right now. But then somebody else is like, ooh, Kutna Hora. I'm like, oh, I could totally throw that down. And as a rules teacher, and I know, many people who listen to this are probably primary rules teachers or often rules teachers. That is something. That is an element. There are many good games that almost never get played in our house because I just can't be bothered to teach them again.
Yeah, and I would classify this as like a medium weight game. Like, it's not heavy, but it's not something I would throw in front of my Ticket to Ride friends by a long shot. And it actually sits there really nicely. I think that it's interesting. Like, in the board game hobby, there's a lot of light medium games these days, are like kind of the rage. And then there's the very heavy games. And actually, like, I've not played a solid medium weight game in a minute.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about this game, and I really like it. Like, quite a lot. This game really surprised me. I'm kicking myself for having it sit on my shelf for months, not being played, and then suddenly I've played it 5 times in like a couple of weeks. But I could totally see why this game isn't going to be for everybody, and I'm genuinely not sure what the two of you are going to say. Like, as far as like, we're kind of doing our wrap up here. Like, what do we all think? And we've talked a lot. We've played the game multiple times, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But from my perspective, from my personal game taste perspective, I like interaction these days. I was just telling Nick that my new kind of motto for what I like in board gaming in general is playing with nice people and mean games. Like, I don't want mean people, mean games. I don't want mean people, nice games. I want nice people, mean games. And this game can feel like that. You got to bring your own nice people, but it can be a mean game in a lot of ways and a very interactive game. And I can tolerate / sometimes quite enjoy multiplayer solitaire games. Evacuation, it's a pretty multiplayer solitaire game, and I had a lot of very positive things to say about it. I did enjoy it a lot. But this game, the way you're interacting and the way what other people do really matters. And you're not just like, oh, is it my turn yet? You're like looking to see what they're doing, and like they do this, they do that, and it affects your plans. That is my jam right now. But some people hate that. and I think a lot of people are going to be quite turned off by this game. It would not surprise me if it ends up being pretty polarizing.
I agree. I think it's going to be a pretty polarizing game. I really liked learning it. I think the situation in which I would like this game most is if I had a group and I was going to play this a bunch.
Yeah.
Like I enjoyed, playing it to learn the game, but I think that if I was really going to like this game, I'd need to be committed to playing it 5 to 10 times. So it's like, oh, okay, great. I get it. Like you've built this thing. I've got a path. I've got my eyes on you. I think that's where it would really shine for me. So I think if you're not going to get this to the table repeatedly, I would definitely try it before buying it, kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't really know where my gaming tastes stand right now, and obviously, it's funny because look, just on the surface, inexperience, like this is really not a game for me, right? I mean, I think we all kind of know that Nick likes to say, like, I don't like it. I like to build my sandcastle. Please don't kick it over. Actually, don't get anywhere close to it, but then send me all your money. But having said that, I as we've been playing this one quite a bit over the last couple weeks, and, in the meantime, like I broke out Evacuation again, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but like, I feel like John's rubbing off on me a little bit, where like I was like, oh, like I'm not even paying attention to what you're doing. Like I don't really care what you're doing. Like I'm doing my thing. But like, and then like I've been playing Great Western Trail with Nick, and like I'm like, oh, it's like now like there's an interactive element that I do kind of find myself getting a little bit more drawn to, or tolerating, even enjoying. But I think that the difference between this game and other interactive Euros is that I still like it when the game is kind of like a little bit more 50-50. Like I'm going to build my thing, I'm going to do my thing, and then it's going to be like my thing versus your thing out in the world. And like, I do care about what you're doing, and you are impacting me, and I do have to adapt, but the things that you are doing are not making it so that like, I can't even build my thing. And that's kind of the thing that I struggle with this game, is that constantly fluctuating economy makes it really hard for me to plan. It makes it really hard for me to execute what I want to do. And that's just how I play games, right? Like that's just what I'm enjoying about games at this moment right now. I've never loved the shared incentives quite as much as John. But that doesn't mean I don't enjoy them a little bit. I do like markets. I do like economies. I do like, I am starting to enjoy more and more interaction in my games, and like I just said, like even, multiplayer solitaire is a little solitaire.
Yeah. But
this is a lot of interaction. But you know what? If you like economic simulations that are interactive, because this is interactive, you're not killing each other, you're not attacking each other, it's not your armies, we're not playing Scythe over here. Like this is straight up like economic brutality. Yeah. And that's cool.
All right, everyone, I think that's going to wrap this episode of Friendly Ties for us. If you're listening to this on audio and you want to weigh in a little bit, head on over to YouTube and drop a comment on this video version of this audio so that we can hear what you thought about the game yourself, or just any reactions you had and your experiences, or just thoughts about anything we said. So thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.